chapter 34, which contains an account of the arrest of Bouchotte and Maurice, of the disaster which befell the De Esprevu library, and of the departure of the angels. Maurice Desprevu passed a terrible night. At least sound, he seized his revolver that he might not fall alive into the hands of justice. When morning came, he snatched the newspapers from the hands of the concierge, devoured them greedily, and gave a cry of joy. He had just read that Inspector Groll, having been taken to the morgue for the post-mortem, the police surgeons had only discovered bruises and contusions of a very superficial nature, and stated that death had been brought about by the rupture of an aneurysm of the aorta. You see, Arcade, he exclaimed triumphantly, you see, I'm not an assassin. I'm innocent. I could never have imagined how extremely agreeable it is to be innocent. Then he grew thoughtful, and no unusual phenomenon. Reflection dissipated his gaiety. I am innocent, but there is no disguising the fact, he said, shaking his head. I am one of a band of malefactors. I live with miscreants. You are in your right place there, Arcade, for you are deceitful, cruel, and perverse. But I come of good family, and have received an excellent education, and I blush for it. I also, said Arcade, have received an excellent education. Where was that? In heaven. No, Arcade. No, you never had any education. If good principles had been inculcated into you, you would still hold them. Such principles are never lost. In my childhood, I learned to revere my family, my country, my religion. I have not forgotten the lesson, and I never shall. Do you know what shocks me most in you? It is not your perversity, your cruelty, your black ingratitude. It is not your agnosticism, which may be born with at a pinch. It is not your skepticism, though it is very much out of date. For since the national awakening, there is no longer any skepticism in France. No, what disgusts me in you is your lack of taste, the bad style of your ideas, the ineloquence of your doctrines. You think like an intellectual. You speak like a freethinker. You have theories which reek of radicalism and Cumbayism and all ignoble systems. Get along with you. You disgust me, Arcade, my old friend. Arcade, my dear angel. Arcade, my beloved child. Listen to your guardian angel. Yield to my prayers. Renounce your mad ideas. Become good, simple, innocent, and happy once more. Put on your hat. Come with me to Notre Dame. We will say a prayer and burn a candle together. Meanwhile, public opinion was still active in the matter. The leading papers, the organs of the national awakening, and articles of real elevation and real depth, unveiled the philosophy of this monstrous attack, which was revolting to the conscience. They discovered the real origin, the indirect but effective cause of in the revolutionary doctrines, which have been disseminated unchecked in the weakening of social ties, the relaxing of moral discipline, and the repeated appeals to every appetite, to every greedy desire. It would be needful so as to cut down the evil at its root, to repudiate as quickly as possible all such chimeras and utopias as syndicalism, the income tax, etc., etc., etc. Many newspapers and these, not the least important, pointed out that the recrudescence of crime was but the natural fruit of impiety, and concluded that the salvation of society lay in an unanimous and sincere return to religion. On the Sunday which followed the crime, the congregations in the churches were noticed to be unusually large. Judge Salmude, who was entrusted with this task of investigation, first examined the persons arrested by the police and lost his way among attractive but illusory clues. However, the report of the detective Montremain, which was laid before him put him on the right road, and soon led him to recognize the miscreants of La Jonchère as the authors of the crime of the Rue de Rame. He ordered a search to be made for Arcade and Zita, and issued a warrant against Prince Istar, on whom the detectives laid hands as he was leaving Bouchotte's, where he had been depositing some bombs of new design. The Carib, on learning the detectives' intentions, smiled broadly and asked them if they had a powerful motor car. On their replying that they had one at the door, he assured them that was all he wanted. Thereupon, he felled the two detectives on the stairs, walked up to the waiting car, flung the chauffeur under a motor bus, which was opportunely passing, and seized the steering wheel under the eyes of the terrified crowd. That same evening, Monsieur Gincourt, the police magistrate, entered Théophile's rooms, just when Bouchotte was swallowing a raw egg to clear her voice, for she was to sing her new song. They haven't got any in Germany. At the National Eldorado that evening, the musician was absent. Bouchotte received the magistrate and received him with a hauteur which intensified the simplicity of her attire. Bouchotte was en deshabille. The worthy magistrate seized the score of Hélène, Queen of Golconda, and the love letters which the singer carefully preserved in the drawer of the table by her bed, for she was an orderly young woman. He is about to withdraw when he espied a cupboard, which he opened with a careless air, and found machines capable of blowing up half Paris, and a pair of large white wings, whose nature and use appeared inexplicable to him. Bouchotte was invited to complete her toilet, and in spite of her cries, was taken off to the police station. Monsieur Selneuve was indefatigable. After the examination of the papers seized in Bouchotte's house, and acting on the information of Montremain, he issued a warrant for the arrest of young d'Esparvu, which was executed on Wednesday, the 27th of May, at 7 o'clock in the morning, with great discretion. For 3 days, Maurice had neither slept nor eaten, loved nor lived. He had not a moment's doubt as to the nature of the matutinal visit. At the sight of the police magistrate, a strange calm fell on him. Arcade had not returned to sleep in the flat. Maurice begged the magistrate to wait for him, dressed with care, and then accompanied the magistrate, a calmness of mind which was barely disturbed when the door of the concierge closed on him. Alone in his cell, he climbed upon the table to look out. His tranquillity was due to his weariness of spirit, to his numbed senses, and to the fact that he no longer stood in fear of arrest. His misfortune endowed him with superior wisdom. He felt he had fallen into a state of grace. He did not think too highly or too humbly of himself, but left his cause in the hands of God, with no desire to cover up his faults, which he would not hide, even from himself. He addressed himself in mind to Providence, to point out that if he had fallen into disorder and rebellion, it was to lead his erring angel back into the straight path. He stretched himself on the couch and slept in peace. On the hearing of the arrest of a music hall singer and of a young man of fashion, both Paris and the provinces felt painful surprise. Deeply stirred by the tragic accounts which the leading newspapers were bringing out, the general idea was that that sort of people the authorities ought to bring to justice were ferocious anarchists, all reeking and dripping from deeds of blood and arson. But they failed to understand what the world of art and fashion should have to do with such things. At this news, which he was one of the last to hear, the president of the council and keeper of the seals of Napoleon, keeper of the seals, started up in his car. The sphinxes that adorned it were less terrible than he, and in the throes of his angry meditation, he cut the mahogany of his imperial table with his penknife, after the manner of Napoleon. And when Judge Salneuve, whose attendance he had commanded, appeared before him, the president flung his penknife in the grate, as Louis XIV flung his cane out of the window in the presence of Lauzun, and it cost him a supreme effort to master himself and to say in a voice of suppressed fury, "Are you mad? Surely I said often enough that I meant the plot to be anarchist, antisocial, fundamentally antisocial and anti-governmental, with a shade of syndicalism. I have made it clear enough that I wanted it kept within these lines. And what do you go and make of it? The vengeance of anarchists and aspirants to freedom. Whom do you arrest? A singer adored of the nationalistic public, the son of a man highly esteemed in the Catholic party, who receives our bishops and has the entree to the Vatican, a man who may be one day sent as ambassador to the Pope. At one blow, you alienate 160 deputies and 40 senators of the right on the very eve of a motion to discuss the question of religious pacification. You embroil me with my friends of today, with my friends of tomorrow. What was it to find out, if you were in the same dilemma as de Abel, that you seized the love letters of young Maurice de Esparvu? I can put your mind to rest on that point. You are, and all Paris knows it, but it is not to avenge your personal affronts that you are on the bench. Monsieur le garde de Sceaux, murmured the judge, nearly apoplectic, and in a choked voice. I am an honest man. You are a fool and a provincial. Listen to me. If Maurice de Esparvu and Mademoiselle Bouchotte are not released within half an hour, I will crush you like a piece of glass. Be off. Monsieur René de Esparvu went himself to fetch his son from the concierge, and took him back to the old house in the Rue Garancier. The return was triumphant. The news had been disseminated that Maurice had, with generous imprudence, interested himself in an attempt to restore the monarchy, and that Judge Salneuve, the infamous Freemason, the tool of Combe and André, had tried to compromise the young man by making him out to be an accomplice of a band of criminals. That was what the Abbé Patouille seemed to think, and he answered for Maurice as for himself. It was known, moreover, that breaking with his father, who had rallied to the support of the Republic, young de Esparvu was on the high road to becoming an out-and-out royalist. The people who had an inside knowledge of things saw in his arrest the vengeance of the Jews. Was not Maurice a notorious anti-Semite? Catholic youths went forth to hurl imprecations at Judge Salneuve under the windows of his residence in the Rue Guénégaud, opposite the Mint. On the Boulevard du Palais, a band of students presented Maurice with a branch of palm. Maurice made a charming reply. Maurice was overcome with emotion when he beheld the old house in which his childhood had been spent, and fell weeping into his mother's arms. It was a great day, unhappily marred by one painful incident. Monsieur Sariette, who had lost his reason as a consequence of the shocking events that had taken place in the Rue de Courcelles had suddenly become violent. He had shut himself up in the library, and there he had remained for 24 hours, uttering the most horrible cries and turning a deaf ear alike to threats and entreaties. Refused to come out, he had spent the night in a condition of extreme restlessness. For all night long, the lamp had been seen passing rapidly to and fro behind the curtains. In the morning, hearing Hippolyte shouting to him from the court below, he opened the window of the hall of the spheres and the philosophers, and heaved 2 or 3 rather weighty tomes onto the old valet's head. The whole of the domestic staff, men, women, and boys, hurried to the spot, and the librarian proceeded to throw out books by the armful onto their heads. In view of the gravity of the situation, Monsieur René d'Espervieux did not disdain to intervene. He appeared in nightcap and dressing gown, and attempted to reason with the poor lunatic, whose only reply was to pour forth the torrents of abuse on the man whom till then he had worshipped as his benefactor, and to endeavor to crush him beneath all the Bibles, all the Talmuds, all the sacred books of India and Persia, all the Greek fathers, and all the Latin fathers, St. John Chrysostom, St. Gregory Nazianzen, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, all the apologists, under the History des Variations, annotated by Bouchotte himself. Octavus Quartus folios came crashing down and lay in a sordid heap on the courtyard pavement. The letters of Gassendi, of Pierre, Mersenne, of Pascal were blown about hither and thither by the wind. The lady's maid, who had stooped down to rescue some of the sheets from the gutter, got a blow on the head from an enormous Dutch atlas. Madame René d'Espervieux had been terrified by the ominous sounds, and appeared on the scene without wanting to apply the finishing touches of powder and paint. When he caught sight of her, old Sariette became more violent than ever. Down they came one after another as hard as he could pelt them. The busts of the poets, philosophers, and historians of antiquity, Homer, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Herodotus, Theoclides, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Cicero, Virgil, Horace, Seneca, Epictetus, all lay scattered on the ground. The celestial sphere and the terrestrial globe descended with a terrifying crash that was followed by a ghastly hush, broken only by the shrill laughter of little Leon, who was looking down on the scene from a window above. A locksmith having opened the library door, all the household hastened to enter, and found the aged Sariette entrenched behind piles of books, busily engaging in tearing and slashing away at the Lucretius of the Prior de Vendôme, annotated in Voltaire's own hand. They had to force a way through the barricade, but the maniac, perceiving that his stronghold was being invaded, fled away and escaped onto the roof. For 2 whole hours he gave vent to shouts and yells that were heard far and wide. In the Rue Grand Sire, the crowd kept growing bigger and bigger. All had their eyes fixed on the unhappy creature, and whenever he stumbled on the slates which cracked beneath him, they gave a shout of terror. In the midst of the crowd, the Abbé Patouille, who expected every moment to see him hurled into space, was reciting the prayers for the dying, and making ready to give him the absolution in extremis. There was a cordon of police around the house, keeping order. Someone summoned the fire brigade, and the sound of their approach was soon heard. They placed a ladder against the wall of the house, and after a terrific struggle managed to secure the maniac, who in the course of his desperate resistance had one of the muscles of his arm torn out. He was immediately removed to an asylum. Maurice dined at home, and there were smiles of tenderness and affection when Victor, the old butler, had brought on the roast veal. Monsieur l'Abbé Tuil sat at the right hand of the Christian mother, unctuously contemplating the family, which heaven had so plentifully blessed. Nevertheless, Madame d'Esprevoux was ill at ease. Every day she received anonymous letters of so insulting and coarse a nature that she thought at first they must come from a discharged footman. She now knew that they were the handiwork of her youngest daughter, Berthe, a mere child. Little Leon, too, gave her pain and anxiety. He paid no attention to his lessons and was given to bad habits. He showed a cruel disposition. He had plucked his sister's canaries alive. He stuck innumerable pins into the chair on which Mademoiselle Caporal was accustomed to sit, and had stolen 14 francs from the poor girl, who did nothing but cry and dab her eyes and nose from morning till night. No sooner was dinner over than Maurice rushed off to the little dwelling in the Rue de Rome, impatient to meet his angel once again. Through the door he had heard a loud sound of voices, and saw assembled in the room where the apparition had taken place Arcade, Zita, that angelic musician, and the cherub, who was lying on the bed, smoking a huge pipe, carelessly scorching pillows, sheets, and coverlets. They embraced Maurice and announced their departure. Their faces shone with happiness and courage. Alone the inspired author of Aline, Queen of Golconda, shed tears and raised his terrified gaze to heaven. The cherub forced him into the party of rebellion by setting before him two alternatives: either to allow himself to be dragged from prison to prison on earth, or to carry fire and sword into the palace of Yaldabaoth. Maurice perceived with sorrow that the earth had scarcely any hold over them. They were setting out, filled with immense hope, which was quite justifiable. Doubtless they were but a few combatants to oppose the innumerable soldiers of the Sultan of the Heavens, but they counted on compensating for the inferiority of their numbers by the irresistible impetus of a sudden attack. They were not ignorant of the fact that Yaldabaoth, who flatters himself on knowing all things, sometimes allows himself to be taken by surprise, and it certainly looked as if the first attack would have taken him unawares had it not been for the warning of the Archangel Michael. The celestial army had made no progress since its victory over the rebels before the beginning of time. As regards armaments and material, it was as out of date as the army of the Moors. Its generals slumbered in sloth and ignorance. Loaded with honors and riches, they preferred the delights of the banquet to the fatigues of war. Michael, the commander-in-chief, ever loyal and brave, had lost with the passing of centuries his fire and enthusiasm. The conspirators of 1914, on the other hand, knew the very latest and most delicate appliances of science for the art of destruction. At length, all was ready and decided upon. The army of Revolt assembled by corps, each 100,000 angels strong, on all the waste places of the earth, steppes, pampas, deserts, fields of ice and snow, were ready to launch itself against the sky. The angels, in modifying the rhythm of the atoms of which they are composed, are able to traverse the most varied mediums. Spirits that have descended onto the earth, being formed since their incarnation of too compact a substance, can no longer fly of themselves and rise into ethereal regions, and then insensibly grow volatilized, have need of the assistance of their brothers, who, though revolutionaries like themselves, nevertheless stayed behind in the Empyrean, and remained not immaterial, for all is matter in the universe, but gloriously untrammeled and diaphanous. Tertius It was not without painful anxiety that Arcade, Istar, and Zeta prepared themselves to pass from the heavy atmosphere of the earth to the limpid depths of the heavens. To plunge into the ether, there is need to expend such energy that most intrepid hesitate to take flight. Their very substance, while penetrating this fine medium, must in itself grow, fine spun, become vaporized, and pass from human dimensions into the volume of the vastest clouds which have ever enveloped the earth. Soon they would surpass in grandeur the uttermost planets, whose orbits they, invisible and imponderable, would traverse without disturbing. In this enterprise, the vastest that angels could undertake, their substance would be ultimately hotter than the fire and colder than the ice, and they would suffer pangs sharper than death. Maurice read all the daring and the pain of the undertaking in the eyes of Arcade. You are going, he said to him, weeping. We are going, with Nectaire, to seek the great archangel to lead us to victory. Whom do you call thus? The priest of the demiurge have made him known to you in their calumnies. Unhappy being, sighed Maurice. Arcade embraced him, and Maurice felt the angel's tears as they dropped upon his cheek. And let us remember that regardless of our attachments and who's supposedly leading us, we're responsible for our choices. It's not, oh, well, you've misled us. Yeah, maybe they did. But that doesn't mean that one isn't responsible oneself. And one thing to be particularly careful of is that the very things that you're endeared to, you could turn against in a way like that. And you never know when one deed can undo you to far greater extent than initially thought.